Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I'm very pleased to present you with my most recent plugin, BussColors 4. This is something that I've been working on for a long time, as you might imagine. Since it's BussColors 4, obviously there have been 3 earlier versions of it. It first came out somewhat earlier than the big trend for console emulation plugins, of which there have been some very popular trendy ones, I might say. And I've continued to pursue it, but it's always had this one particular limitation that didn't really fit with what I normally do. It was always tied to 44.1K until now. Yep, BussColors 4 is designed for all sample rates, and in fact it sounds fantastic at 96K and at 192K. Now, I think it may be using a little bit more resources than the previous one for that reason, but the CPU that it uses doesn't wildly scale up at the higher sample rates. It's pretty much just as efficient at whatever sample rate you use it. I'm recording this at 44 because, a lot of people do. Let's just demonstrate it. I think you will find that this is, you're not going to need a double-blind test to ascertain whether or not it's doing anything. If you think that you do, you can always crank up the input trim, and I'll show you that too. But let's start. This is plain raw digital audio workstation. And I'll cut forward. And we're going to have a lead guitar tone. I would suggest that you listen to this lead guitar tone as I switch this around. I'll turn it on now. Just off again. On again. So we've got these different settings. This one, called Dark, is, I've designed this after some older consoles. I'm thinking like the Dark Side of the Moon. I'm going to try to not beat into the ground the fact that these sometimes originate from impulse responses or sets of impulse responses from older actual hardware. What happened with this, and indeed the original BussColors, is I got asked to do a kind of plugin where you could take different console impulses and it would react differently if you were hitting the console soft versus if you were slamming the console really hard. And that's how BussColors works, is it is making a on-the-fly sort of measurement of how much strain the console is under level-wise. And it's generating, and there have been many things that stake some claim to this kind of behavior. For instance, there is a, I forget who did it, but somebody has possessed the concept of dynamic convolution, so we can't call it that. And of course, there's Nebula. Nebula eats a lot of CPU. Nebula is a very cool thing. The person behind, at least Zaphod behind Nebula, is one of the few people who helped me get my VSTs together. So I really appreciate him. Now what these do is, this is more of a MCI style console, sort of dark side, kind of big, more dark. Rock is basically the general concept of your SSL kind of thing. It'll tighten up the bass a little bit. It'll have a certain kind of sonority and a certain kind of high end. Lush, that's going to be everybody's little Neve imitations. You'll notice more bass with this guy. And like I said, this was originally designed around convolution impulses of real hardware. I talked to somebody on a place called Noise Vault who was looking for someone that could code that for him. And I processed the samples I got from that fellow who wanted somebody to make a plugin, and basically reprocessed them and did new things to them until they're no longer any exact clone of anything. These are all pretty much airwindows style-y things. So that would be your Neve style. Vibe, I don't even know what this would be. I forget what that one was made from. But it's a sort of, well, we'll have a listen to it and see what we think. Holo is another type of approach. Holo does a good job of making this kind of holographic imaging kind of thing. It's very good at 3D space. Punch, well, I've got some of those. Punch is based off of API stuff. That's where I got the impulses from that. And it does a recognizable version of that, but again, no specific unit, no specific piece. They're modified from the original purposes. They're modified from the original situation so that they don't represent any actual hardware out there. Instead, it's getting the tone. I tried to get a unique tone for each of these. The steel is a very unique tone. It's definitely lacking in bass, and I thought it sounded kind of like crazy old home-built studios in Jamaica for reggae, and now I'm spacing out the dance hall. And I'm thinking that sounds kind of like that. And then lastly, tube is my take on what a real tube console sounds like, and that's not dull or smeared. It's got a sort of luminous, airy quality about it. And now that I've shown you a little glimpse of it, let's go through these and show them. So this is without. We'll turn this on. This is the dark one. Here's rock. Now check out lush. Listen to the bass. A lot of bigness on there. Now, vibe. Sort of a spacey sound to this one. Hollow. You can hear sort of the drums out there. Punch. Got some real impact going on there. Here's the weird one, still. It's got a real unusual sound to it. Lastly, we'll turn it off for a second. The guitar just got a lot smaller. We can do things like get the drums. Rock gives us more definition on the drums. We can go to lush. Listen to what happens to the guitar tone. Got a little more body solidity to it. So yeah, this is BussColors 4. This is the one that'll work at 96K, it'll work at 88.2, it'll work at some weird middle K like 76 or something if you have that. And it'll work at 192K. Now, it's not designed to go any farther than that. It won't actually, if I'm not mistaken, it'll let you go a little tiny bit farther than that, but at some point it will refuse to push anymore. and you'll start getting like 384 if you're mad enough to use that. It should still not use significantly more CPU at something like 384K, which is more DST sample rate. But what would happen is it would start to pitch up the models a little bit at that point, because there's a bailout that makes it not just fall over and die when you over... The thing with doing digital delay buffers is that if you smash the buffers, bad things happen. So it has to learn to behave itself, and it has to keep things within a certain limit. Now, one other thing I've got over here, seeing as I'm demonstrating it, is our good old Alien Kittens and the synthetic piece, where this one was generated by an iPhone app. So this is a good example of what you can get if you take BussColors and run it into a I'm sorry, I've been working really hard on all of this stuff. You'll see next week, you'll see another thing I've been building. If you run completely synthetic stuff into BussColors, it'll sound bigger and it'll sound a little more like an analog thing. That's the whole point of designing it that way. And Alien Kittens does this quite well. In fact, I tested the high sample rate stuff by running a resampled version of Alien Kittens through BussColors and listened to what that made. And it was pretty neat. Like 96K and 192K were kind of cool. It even did a little bit of that Neil Young thing where he's like, 96K is like barely above water, and then 192K you're frolicking through meadows and fields in the clean air and the sunlight. And well, that's turned out not to be that great marketing, because the panos he was selling, that's not really a thing anymore. I would point out, however, as an aside, seeing as I'm talking to probably a lot of people who see that BussColors is out, if you can get panos for super cheap, do it. It's going to be really useful to have an incredibly high quality sound source. You can do things like if you were taking an old sampler that only had analog inputs, and you would like to do a digital transfer to it, but you can't digitally transfer to a pano and play that into it. Phenomenal, incredible sound. There's bound to be lots of good uses for it. I'm just waiting for the first time you have somebody doing a EDM concert, and then rather than playing stuff off of a laptop, they're playing stuff off of a set of panos and mixing between those, because that would sound amazing. That aside, however, here's Alien Kittens with BussColors 4, first without anything. And here's what we're going to do. Overdrive. We're going to slam it a little bit, 3 dB. You can see we're 6 dB down, and it's not doing any harm. Now let's switch over to rock. And again, when we do this, we're limiting the maximum output, because it's acting like a kind of clipper. We're overloading the virtual console in there. But another thing we're hearing is the tonality changing. Again, back to this. Got a certain amount of slam going on here. Now, lush. Now that one's got such a big bass that you can plainly hear it kind of overloading and distorting. Vibe. Totally different feel. Totally different feel. Hollow. This one doesn't have a distorted quality quite so much. and punch. You can really hear that too, the smack of it. It's got a lot of guts to it. Steel. Now this one does not distort the lows nearly so much. But it's got a real quality to it. And then lastly, tube. And one more thing. Let's go back to rock. So what we're going to do is use the input trim. I've got it padded, so it might get kind of loud and distorty, but it's not going to peak out at all. And what we're going to do is take the input trim and start pushing it steadily up until we're slamming the hell out of the rock desk. Now the rock desk is the one, it's its own thing, but it was originally based on noise vault samples of SSL gear. So what we're going to do here is see if we can get a really outrageous slam out of this crazy thing. And you'll hear what it sounds like as you push it and push it and push it, because this is sort of designed to take that. Now, there's a caveat that it's also calibrated to work with console. And I can demonstrate that as well. In fact, perhaps I will, but for now, here's what we get using it just as a sound processor. And we engage. Oh, look, the volume got less. Let's go and fix that, shall we? It's probably too much. Now that's a pretty serious snare mark. Now that's pretty aggressive. Here I will demonstrate the other thing I was telling you about, which is if we put console on here, we're going to use console for bus. It has an input pad, we're going to ignore it. These now work like they're part of the console system. Console normally works with this, console 4 channel. And back when I was doing BussColors 3, one of the things I did with it was I set it up so that if you're using console and you're using the system, you can swap out BussColors for console 4 channel and then have the channels get these colorations. Now you can also stick a BussColors on after console 4 bus. Probably don't want it between there because it's calibrated to use just one instance of this. And what we're going to do is, I'm going to scoot this back just a bit. And we're going to hear what this sounds like. As you can see, it's catching the also to the point where we've got just a little bit of clippiness, so I'm going to also add a airwindows post effect here. Back to blue. Did I call that curious clip? No, I did not. Let's call it clip only. So there I'm sticking in a safety clipper so that console can do its thing, but it won't blow, because console is not itself a limiter, console will give you peaks that are way beyond what the output file should have. So what we're going to do is check this out. It's really aggressive when we do this. I'll tone it back down again. Now what we're hearing there, and you know something, I might as well, I'll cool it off a bit. So let's dial that back so that it's just around a couple of dB down from clipping. I'm just manipulating it in this way so that I can show you the differences in the bus color settings. And we've got that. We're going to slam it by 3 dB. When using this with console, you should leave output trim and dry wet as default. There should be no boost to output trim, and dry wet should be at 1. Now the exception is if you have some kind of bassy sound going through here, you might want to sneak a little bit of dry in there, enough to get more of the extreme lows that you want out of it. But in some ways it's better to just use, that's better saved for a video on console. Here I'll show you what they sound like. So there's rock. It's dark. Lush. Now that's a big bass right there. 5. One thing you'll notice about using BussColors as the channel encoder of the console system is that we're getting really big changes in sound from this. Onward. Hollow. Steel. Again, bass kind of goes away here. And tube. Listen to the air, the highs. Now, one neat thing about that is that by using BussColors and console, and I'm going to keep it on tube to demonstrate what happens here. When we have that peak of the drums and the cymbal coming in again, you get a huge emphasis in the sort of shape of the sound and the way it's being presented. I'll demonstrate it by doing a little A/B of no processing and the BussColors / console system. This is no processing. A little flat. Then yeah, the neat thing about that is it's actually compressing some of the dynamics a little bit. Because it's like a console model, what it's doing is constraining some of that stuff, but it's giving an image of that cymbal head coming in that's very communicative. It's able to explain what it's doing a little bit better than just the plain one. Like, well, again, I'll show you the plain one. Plenty of dynamics there, plenty of voltage in the little calculations there, but compared to this. sometimes when you're doing processing that constrains a sound, like saturating it or putting a console modeling on it, stuff like that, what you get out of the combinations of the waveforms is a acoustic event that's more convincingly like what you would have in open air. It's more convincingly like what you would have in reality. And reality is more convincing than sheer, unadulterated math. Basically, in the digital audio workstation, it's easy to get stuff that's very accurately calculated, but is not very convincing, because it's sort of overstepping its bounds. It's not combining in the way that things would in an acoustic event. So as a result, what you've got is, a sort of lack of conviction. Here, I'll bounce over to, say, let's use Lush, and let's not slam it because it's already fairly boosted. And we'll hear what that sounds like with or without. It's raw digital audio workstation. Now that's obviously quieter. In fact, tell you what. We can adjust the trim on this, and see there, our peaks are like here. And we set it up like that. And you can plainly hear with the raw digital audio workstation version, which is this, that the dynamic peaks of the drums are more clearly defined. They're more clearly represented. This is out of an iPhone app, so it's all just very direct and raw. And all of the little peaks are, you could say, more accurate, but they don't feel as convincing. Then we turn on BussColors and console. And it becomes more plausible in some ways because things are happening to the sound that are similar to what would happen in an analog gear or what would happen in free air. And that's a pretty key concept for working in the box. BussColors has been one of my most successful plugins. It was one of the very top sellers in its day and has always done really well. And, some people would try to release it for PC and try to turn a buck on it, and I'm doing that, kind of. In a sense, I'm doing that because BussColors 4 is free. It is free AU, free Mac VST, free PC VST, and it's all supported by my Patreon. What I'm doing with the Patreon is getting myself into a position where I can produce whatever plugins I need to produce, and without any obstacles, without anything that's directing me to do one thing or another. I've talked about this in the recent iron oxide classic video, in that producing multiple versions of iron oxide, I kept having to add all kinds of extra stuff, and the very first version of it was actually good in its own way. It's now iron oxide classic, but you're working in a commercial business, you have to keep throwing new stuff out there. Well, BussColors 4 is probably all you're going to need for analog emulation style stuff. I'll also point out that when I'm using BussColors combined with console, you're hearing it in the worst possible context, because it's effectively the same thing as doing this. And what console is supposed to do is combine multiple channels, not just one channel, but multiple channels. I'm only feeding it a single stereo channel, so you're hearing console at its worst. If you do a mix using BussColors for console channels, the console channel plug, and then console bus on the bus like this, and until AD clip comes out, you've got clip only, and that'll do the job for being a output clipper in situations like this. If you use this on a real mix, it's going to sound better than what you just heard, because console is about combining the multiple channels and handling that in a special way. Now, the deal with BussColors is all of these settings are individually calibrated to work with console. Every single one of them has been set up so that if you leave the output trim and dry wet alone, and the dry wet is a new addition to BussColors 4 because people ask me for it so much, and sometimes it feels important to keep the concept of the plugin to do a certain thing, but in this circumstance, BussColors is going to be one of the more popular ones, and so I thought I'd better throw the dry wet in there. Just because people would really want it, and there's no sense in taking something that I know is going to have really wide-ranging use and limiting it in any way. So there you have it. I've talked more than long enough. And if you stuck around listening to me, you've only got yourself to blame because you've got a download link for BussColors 4, and rather than listen to me, you could always just take it and start using it. That's kind of the whole point. When the open source thing kicks in, which I think is at the threshold of $700 a month, unless it's $8. When the open source thing kicks in, this is one of the plugins that can be released as open source under the MIT license, and then other people will be able to use this algorithm as well. That will make things interesting, because it'll mean that people will be able to design their own weird things, like they'll design, I don't know, a flanger or a pitch shifter, but then they'll make it be the Neve pitch shifter by throwing this algorithm into it on top of that. And I'd like to see that kind of thing. I'd like to see people able to draw on a wide range of software algorithms just so that they're not held hostage by big or would-be big companies that put out software and they're really sneaky and coy about what's going on because they're trying to be the secret sauce and they're trying to corner the market in that kind of stuff. So you have to go to them and you have to use them on whatever terms they put forth. And I don't like that kind of pressure. So I would say, if you're still listening, because this is a long video, BussColors 4 is the console emulation plugin from airwindows. It doesn't have to be used with console 4. That's just a sort of added bonus. If you're good at using airwindows systems and know how to use console, but you can use it just as a drop-in, like on the bus or whatever. And if you're going to compare things to other companies that might have more demanding restrictions in how you use their stuff, or might be a lot more costly, my Patreon is designed to work with just a lot of people entering it at $1 a month. That's $12 a year. So in 4 years, you'll still not have paid as much as you would have buying it outright at $50 a pop. This is the one to compare to other people's stuff. I would like to see things like shootouts and your blind tests and all that kind of stuff. It can be tricky and manipulative to get into all that sort of thing. But BussColors is the one that will perform really well under those circumstances. So go ahead and get comparable sounds. In fact, do it at 96K. Do it at 192K. Knock yourself out and see how this free AU/VST stacks up against the best that the plugin industry has to offer. You might be surprised. And I might be very pleased, because this is my gift to you. Thanks.